December 1987, Boston, Massachusetts. Four musicians walk into Q Division Studios with a $10,000 budget and 10 days to make an album. They've been rehearsing in a sewage-soaked basement. Their previous release sold modestly in the UK. Nobody in America knows who they are. The engineer they've hired, a 25-year-old from Chicago named Steve Albini, thinks they might be too normal, too willing to compromise. He'll record them anyway. He needs the work. 10 days later, they walk out with 13 songs that will be praised as beautifully brutal. An album that a young Kurt Cobain will obsess over, studying its every technical detail. A record that Billy Corgan will call the one that made me go holy shit. An album that PJ Harvey says blew my mind. But the story doesn't end with praise. The engineer will publicly trash the band 3 years later, calling them blandly entertaining college rock and cows anxious to be led around by their nose rings. He'll spend decades apologizing for those words. The album will fail to chart in either the UK or America upon release. Only one single will be released, barely scraping into the UK Top 100. The band will be far more popular in Europe than their home country. Yet 17 years after its release, the album will be certified gold. Its influence will spawn an entire generation of alternative rock. Its title, Surfer Rosa. Welcome to the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. This is the Pixies. January 1986. Charles Thompson IV is 20 years old, working in a Boston warehouse, writing songs on his acoustic guitar during subway rides. He's recently dropped out of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he studied anthropology. 6 months earlier, he'd been in Puerto Rico on a student exchange program, learning Spanish, experiencing poverty firsthand, going scuba diving in the Caribbean where a small fish aggressively followed him underwater. These experiences are becoming lyrics in notebooks he carries everywhere. Thompson grew up in a complicated household. His parents separated twice before he finished first grade. When he was 12, his mother and stepfather joined a Pentecostal church, Assemblies of God, a move that flooded his childhood with biblical imagery, evangelical fervor, and Catholic guilt. All of it is seeping into his songwriting now. Songs about mutilation and incest. Songs referencing superheroes and Puerto Rican poverty. Songs that make no conventional sense but feel deeply, disturbingly real. At UMass, Thompson had roomed with Joey Santiago, a guitarist from the Philippines who'd grown up in Massachusetts. They'd bonded over music, Husker Du, Iggy Pop, surf rock, punk. Santiago noticed Thompson played guitar and they started jamming together. The chemistry was immediate. Now back in Boston, working dead-end jobs, they decide to form a band. Thompson places an ad in the Boston Phoenix. Bassist wanted. Must be into Husker Du and Peter, Paul and Mary. It's an odd combination. Hardcore punk and folk pop. Most people ignore it. Kim Deal is the only person who responds. She shows up to the audition without a bass guitar. She's never played bass before. But something about her voice, her presence, catches Thompson's attention. She's hired on the spot. Deal's husband suggests they hire David Lovering, a drummer he knows from a wedding reception. Lovering is technically an engineer, but he can keep time. The lineup is complete. They need a name. Santiago flips through a dictionary randomly, lands on Pixies. He likes how it looks. Likes the definition, mischievous little elves. The Pixies are born. The music scene they're entering in 1986 is dominated by hair metal, synth pop, and corporate rock. MTV plays Bon Jovi and Whitesnake on endless rotation. Rick Astley and Michael Jackson rule the charts. Even in the underground, most indie bands are polite, jangly, collegiate. The Pixies are none of these things. They rehearse in a basement space in Kenmore Square that reeks of sewage. The conditions are disgusting, but the songs are taking shape. Jagged, violent, melodic, weird. Thompson adopts a stage name, Black Francis. It's inspired by his father, who'd been saving that name in case he had another son. By March 1987, they're ready to record. Thompson's father lends them $1,000. They book 6 days at Fort Apache Studios with producer Gary Smith and emerge with 17 songs on a demo tape. The tape is dubbed the Purple Tape. Their manager sends it to dozens of labels. Most ignore it. Ivo Watts Russell, head of the British independent label 4AD, initially thinks they're too normal, too rock and roll. His girlfriend convinces him to give it another listen. On his second pass, marching around New York with a Walkman, Watts Russell hears something special. The Spanish lyrics, Santiago's guitar playing, the raw, unpolished aggression. He signs them. In September 1987, 4AD releases Come On Pilgrim, an 8-track mini-album culled from the Purple Tape. It peaks at number 5 on the UK indie chart. British music press takes notice. The band is building momentum, but Thompson knows they need a full-length album. Something more focused, something rawer, something that captures the sewage-soaked basement energy they've been cultivating. 4AD agrees. They have a budget, $10,000. They have a studio, Q Division in Boston. And they have a recommendation from 4AD's warehouse manager, a young engineer from Chicago who's been making waves in underground circles. His name is Steve Albini. Steve Albini doesn't want to be called a producer. He prefers engineer or recordist. To him, the title of producer implies manipulation, shaping, commercializing. Albini believes in capturing what the band actually sounds like, not what some executive thinks they should sound like. By late 1987, Albini has built a reputation in underground music circles. As the frontman of the confrontational noise rock band Big Black, he pioneered a thin, abrasive guitar sound that feels like sandpaper on bare skin. His production philosophy is simple. Minimal overdubs, natural room ambience, no digital reverb, no compression on guitars or the main mix, just raw, unvarnished sound. When 4AD sends him a pre-release tape of Come On Pilgrim, Albini is intrigued but skeptical. The Pixies seem talented but perhaps too willing to compromise, too eager to please. He's not sure they're his kind of band, but he needs the work. And there's something undeniably compelling about Thompson's howl, Santiago's angular guitar, Deal's melodic bass, Lovering's straightforward drumming. Albini agrees to meet them. November 1987, a coffee shop in Boston. Albini sits across from the 4 members of Pixies. They discuss what the album should sound like. Thompson wants it raw, wants it to capture the violence and beauty they're creating in rehearsals, wants it to feel dangerous, sexual, biblical, surreal, all at once. Santiago wants the guitars to cut, wants dynamics that shift from whisper quiet to skull-crushing loud without warning. Deal wants her voice featured more prominently. She's written a song called Gigantic, co-written with Francis, and she wants to sing lead on it. Albini listens, takes notes, tells them they'll start recording the next day. The vision is taking shape. This won't be a polished, radio-friendly album. This will be a document of 4 people in a room making noise. This will be confrontational. This will be the Pixies at their most unfiltered. Paul Koldery, who had worked with producer Gary Smith at Fort Apache Studios, recommends Q Division to Albini. The suggestion creates tension. Smith is furious, thinks Koldery is scheming to steal the project, but the decision is made. Q Division it is. 10 working days, $10,000 budget, Albini's fee, a flat one of $500, no royalties. He refuses royalties on principle. He sees them as an insult to the band. The Pixies arrive at Q Division in December 1987, fully rehearsed and ready to work. They've been playing these songs live for months. Every arrangement is locked in. Every dynamic shift is muscle memory. Albini has a plan. He tells both guitarists, Francis and Santiago, to use metal picks instead of standard plastic ones. The metal will create a brighter, more cutting tone. He experiments with running Francis's vocals through guitar distortion pedals on some tracks, creating an inhuman, aggressive quality. For Deal's vocals on Gigantic and Where Is My Mind, Albini moves the recording equipment into the studio bathroom to capture the natural reverb of the tiled space. No digital effects, just real room ambience. He encourages Santiago to experiment. At one point during Vamos, Santiago throws tennis balls at his guitar strings while recording, creating percussive, unpredictable sounds. Albini also makes a controversial decision. He leaves in snippets of studio banter, conversations between takes, Francis saying, "I am one happy prick," after recording vocals through a distortion pedal. Deal recounting a story about a high school teacher who was into field hockey players and got discreetly fired. The vision is clear now. This album will sound like nothing else. Not the clean production of mainstream rock. Not the lo-fi murk of some indie bands. Something in between, brutal but melodic, chaotic but controlled, amateur but confident. The title comes from a lyric in the song Oh My Golly, Besando Chichando con Surfer Rosa, which roughly translates to kissing making love with Surfer Rosa. The album will be called Surfer Rosa. Day 1 at Q Division. Albini sets up microphones. The Pixies plug in their instruments. There's no pre-production meeting, no lengthy discussions about arrangements. They're ready to work. The equipment is basic but effective. Francis plays a blonde 1980s American Standard Telecaster through a Vox AC30 amplifier. Santiago uses Deal's 1970s Gibson Les Paul Goldtop through a PV Special. Deal plays an Aria Pro 2 Cardinal Series bass through a PV Combo 300. Lovering sits behind a basic drum kit. Albini's approach is straightforward. Live takes, minimal overdubs, capture the energy. John Lupfer, Q Division studio assistant, helps with technical setup. The recording process begins. The first song they track is Bone Machine. Santiago's angular riff cuts through immediately. Lovering's drums hit hard and clean. Albini is capturing a drum sound that will become legendary, praised by everyone from Billy Corgan to indie rock engineers for decades to come. Francis's vocals are unhinged, howling about bones and machines and mother's doors. The take is complete in a few passes. They move on. Song after song, the album takes shape rapidly. Break My Body with its incestuous lyrics. Something Against You with Francis's voice distorted through a pedal. Broken Face, clocking in at 90 seconds of pure aggression. Then comes Gigantic, the song Deal co-wrote with Francis. It's the only track on the album where Deal sings lead vocals. Albini moves the recording equipment into the studio bathroom. The tiled walls create natural echo. Deal's voice, melodic, dreamy, contrasting with Francis's usual rasp, floats over the driving bass line. Francis finishes most of his vocal takes in single passes. There's no perfectionism, no endless comping of takes. If he makes a mistake, they keep it. If his voice cracks, they keep it. The imperfection is the point. Where Is My Mind is recorded with similar efficiency. The song Francis wrote after scuba diving in the Caribbean, inspired by a small fish that aggressively followed him underwater. Deal's vocals are again recorded in the bathroom. The song has a dreamy, floating quality that contrasts with the album's more aggressive moments. Santiago's guitar solos are deliberately anti-virtuoso. No shredding, no showing off. Instead, he creates sounds, squealing feedback, angular note choices, percussive attacks. On Vamos, he throws objects at the strings. On other tracks, he plays with his guitar unplugged before suddenly plugging in mid-solo. The recording sessions follow a strict schedule. 10 working days, tick-tock, no time to waste. The band arrives on time, records efficiently, leaves when the session ends. There's excitement but also discipline. Albini's engineering philosophy shapes everything. He refuses to use compression on guitars or the main mix, only 3 or 4 decibels on the bass. He prefers the natural ambience of small rooms over digital reverb. He positions microphones carefully to capture the actual sound of instruments in space. Between takes, the band jokes around. Stories are shared. Deal talks about her high school teacher. Francis makes sarcastic comments. These conversations end up on the album, hidden tracks of studio banter that Albini includes without asking permission first. Years later, Albini will reflect on this decision with regret. It's on their record forever, so I think now they are obliged to say that they're okay with it. But I honestly don't know that that idea would have ever come up if I hadn't done it. There are times when things like that are revealing and entertaining, and I kind of felt it was a bit gimmicky on this record. The Spanish language tracks, Vamos, and references in Oh My Golly, harken back to Francis's time in Puerto Rico. The surreal lyrics throughout the album reflect Francis's reading habits, his biblical upbringing, his fascination with B-movies and pulp culture. Tony's theme references superheroes. Cactus spells out Pixies in the middle. Broken Face deals with mutilation. Gigantic explores voyeurism inspired by the film Crimes of the Heart. The album is a fever dream of sex, violence, religion, and dark humor. By day 10, all 13 tracks are recorded. Extra vocal mixes are added. Albini plans to mix the record somewhere else but isn't happy with the options. They end up mixing at Q Division. The final product is 33 minutes and 32 seconds of music that sounds like nothing else in 1988. It's abrasive but catchy, violent but melodic, lo-fi but clear, amateur but confident. The total cost comes to about $18,000. $8,000 over budget but still remarkably cheap for a full-length album. Surfer Rosa is complete. The album cover immediately causes problems. Photographer Simon Larbalestier shoots a topless woman posing as a flamenco dancer against a wall, displaying a crucifix and a torn poster. The woman is a friend of the band. The set is built because Larbalestier can't find the atmosphere they want naturally. Francis later explains the concept came from his father's topless Spanish bar where he wrote songs. Larbalestier adds the crucifix and torn poster, loading the image with Catholicism. When questioned about the topless element, Francis responds casually about liking body lines and nudity in art. But the image is provocative, controversial. According to Melody Maker, the album was originally going to be titled Gigantic after Deal's song, but the band fears the topless cover combined with that title would be misinterpreted. They change it to Surfer Rosa. The album booklet expands the theme with more photographs of the flamenco dancer in various poses. No lyrics are included, only album credits. The bigger struggle, however, is distribution. Because 4AD is an independent label, distribution in the United States is handled by British label Rough Trade Records. But Rough Trade's infrastructure is limited. The album receives minimal promotion in America. Radio stations ignore it. MTV has no interest. When Surfer Rosa is released in March 1988, it fails to chart in either the UK or the United States. Only one single is released, a re-recorded version of Gigantic produced by Gil Norton at Blackwing Studios in London. It's remixed to sound cleaner, more radio-friendly. The single reaches number 93 on the UK singles chart and stays there for 1 week before disappearing. The commercial failure is disappointing but not surprising. The Pixies are too abrasive for mainstream radio, too weird for MTV, too American for full acceptance in the UK indie scene that had embraced them with Come On Pilgrim. But something else is happening. The British music press is paying attention. Melody Maker names Surfer Rosa their album of the year. So does Sounds magazine, which writes that Pixies are a rock and roll band without parallel at the moment, reaching some kind of dark heart while teetering deliciously on the edge of a precarious cliff of self-deprecating comedy. NME's Mark Sinker gives the album 9.5 stars out of 10, writing that the Pixies forced the past to sound like them. Q magazine praises their sudden bursts of memorable pop melody. American critics are more measured. Robert Christgau of The Village Voice gives it a B rating, noting the band's recognizable guitar riffs and unique rhythms, but feeling they've been overrated as the Amerindie find of the year. Spin magazine calls it beautifully brutal and names Pixies their musicians of the year. College radio in America begins playing tracks. The underground scene takes notice, but mainstream success remains elusive. Internal tensions also begin to simmer. Deal wants more creative input. She's only credited as co-writer on one song, Gigantic, despite contributing significantly to the band's sound. Her melodic bass lines and backing vocals are crucial to the Pixies' dynamic, but Francis dominates the songwriting. This tension will grow over the next few years, eventually contributing to the band's breakup in 1993. But in 1988, it's still manageable. The band tours Europe in support of Surfer Rosa. The shows are intense, chaotic, exhilarating. European audiences respond more enthusiastically than American crowds. The Pixies are becoming cult favorites abroad while remaining largely unknown at home. Meanwhile, Albini is having mixed feelings about the album. He's proud of the sound but frustrated by what he perceives as the band's willingness to be guided by managers and record labels. He thinks they compromise too easily. In his punk rock worldview, this is a cardinal sin. These feelings will explode 3 years later in a very public way. For now, though, Surfer Rosa exists in the world. A strange, violent, beautiful album that sold poorly but resonated deeply with those who heard it. One of those listeners is a 19-year-old from Aberdeen, Washington, playing in a band called Nirvana. His name is Kurt Cobain. March 21st, 1988. Surfer Rosa arrives in record stores across the United Kingdom and United States. The timing is both terrible and perfect. Terrible because the album charts are dominated by corporate rock, synth pop, and the tail end of hair metal. Rick Astley, Michael Jackson, George Michael, and Fleetwood Mac rule the mainstream. MTV is in its prime, favoring glossy production and photogenic artists. Perfect because underground music is quietly evolving. College radio stations are hungry for alternatives to commercial rock. Independent record stores are building communities around bands that major labels ignore. A new generation of music fans is searching for something raw, something real, something that doesn't sound like it was designed by a marketing committee. Surfer Rosa is exactly that. Initial sales are modest. The album doesn't chart. Most mainstream music outlets ignore it completely, but the response from those who do hear it is electric. British music weeklies lead the charge. As mentioned, both Melody Maker and Sounds name it their album of the year. NME places it 10th on their year-end list. The album quickly becomes required listening in UK indie circles. In America, the response is slower but steady. College radio stations in Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and other cities with active underground scenes begin playing tracks. Bone Machine, Gigantic, Where Is My Mind? These songs start filtering through dormitories and alternative clubs. Music critics debate the album's merits. Some find it revelatory, a blueprint for how rock music could sound raw and melodic simultaneously. Others find it too abrasive, too weird, too deliberately anti-commercial. The single Gigantic receives limited airplay. The re-recorded cleaner version is more palatable than the album version, but even this can't penetrate mainstream radio. The song's voyeuristic lyrics and Deal's unconventional vocal approach are too far outside the norm. The album cover generates its share of controversy. Some retailers refuse to display it prominently due to the topless dancer. Others embrace it as artistic and provocative. The image becomes iconic, instantly recognizable to Pixies fans. 4AD is pleased. Ivo Watts-Russell later says the response to Surfer Rosa was ×5 compared to Come On Pilgrim. The label is building a reputation for championing challenging, artistically ambitious music, and the Pixies fit perfectly into that mission. Live shows become increasingly chaotic. The band's quiet, loud, quiet dynamic translates powerfully to the stage. Francis screams and howls. Santiago's guitar cuts through like a chainsaw. Deal's bass holds everything together. Lovering's drumming is precise and powerful. European tours are particularly successful. The Pixies play packed venues in the UK, France, Germany. American tours are smaller, playing clubs and college towns. But even in America, a dedicated fan base is forming. Among that fan base are future rock stars. Billy Corgan, then playing in obscure Chicago bands, hears Surfer Rosa and has an epiphany. Years later he'll say, "It was the one that made me go, holy shit. It was so fresh. It rocked without being lame." Polly Jean Harvey, performing in small UK venues, hears the album and is blown away. She'll later track down Steve Albini to produce her own music. Jay Massis of Dinosaur Jr. compares it favorably to later Pixies albums, saying Albini's production sounded way better than the others. David Bowie, already a legend, discovers the album and becomes a vocal champion. He'll later call it the most compelling music outside of Sonic Youth made in the entire 80s. And then there's Kurt Cobain. The young musician from Washington State hears Surfer Rosa, and something clicks. He studies the album obsessively. The dynamics, the guitar tones, the way songs shift from quiet to explosive. He notices how Albini captures the band's rawness without sacrificing clarity. Cobain will later admit he was trying to rip off the Pixies when writing Smells Like Teen Spirit. He'll say, "When I heard the Pixies for the first time, I connected with that band so heavily I should have been in that band, or at least in a Pixies cover band." But all of this, the influence, the legacy, the cultural impact, is still years away. In March 1988, Surfer Rosa is simply an album that failed to chart, but earned critical praise in select corners of the music world. The Pixies aren't famous, they aren't rich. They're four musicians from Boston who made a weird album in 10 days. Everything is about to change. It takes years for Surfer Rosa to reveal its true impact. The album's influence doesn't happen overnight. It seeps slowly into the musical consciousness of a generation. By 1989, the Pixies released Doolittle, a cleaner-sounding album with a bigger budget, and producer Gil Norton. It becomes more commercially successful, reaching number 8 in the UK and number 98 in the US. Monkey Gone to Heaven and Here Comes Your Man become alternative radio staples. But musicians keep returning to Surfer Rosa. There's something about its rawness, its violence, its refusal to compromise that speaks more powerfully than the polished Doolittle. The loud, quiet, loud dynamic pioneered by Pixies, particularly evident on Surfer Rosa, becomes a defining characteristic of alternative rock in the 1990s. Bands study how the Pixies shift from whisper-soft verses to skull-crushing choruses within seconds. How Santiago's guitar creates tension through angular, unexpected note choices rather than traditional solos. How Francis's howl conveys emotion more effectively than technical vocal prowess. By 1991, this template explodes into the mainstream. Nirvana releases Nevermind, and the quiet, loud, quiet dynamic of Smells Like Teen Spirit is directly lifted from the Pixies' playbook. The song becomes a generational anthem, ushering in the grunge era. Cobain is refreshingly honest about the debt. In interview after interview, he credits the Pixies and Surfer Rosa specifically as major influences. He says he was trying to write the ultimate pop song by ripping off the Pixies. His favorite Pixies song is Gigantic, the one Kim Deal co-wrote. In 1993, when Nirvana records In Utero, Cobain insists on hiring Steve Albini to produce. He wants to capture the same raw energy that made Surfer Rosa so powerful. The resulting album sounds nothing like Nevermind. It's abrasive, uncomfortable, challenging. It's closer to the Pixies than to mainstream grunge. But Nirvana is just the most visible example. The impact radiates outward in countless directions. The Smashing Pumpkins' Billy Corgan continues to cite Surfer Rosa as revelatory. He and his band study the album's technical elements, particularly the drum sound. The loud, quiet, loud dynamics inform Pumpkins' classics throughout the 1990s. Radiohead's Johnny Greenwood admits the early Radiohead sound was heavily influenced by Pixies. In 2001, he'll say on British television, "The reason we don't use as much guitar now is there are only a handful of Pixies albums. You can't keep copying them." PJ Harvey tracks down Albini after hearing Surfer Rosa, leading to collaborations that define her sound. Bands like Modest Mouse, Weezer, The Strokes, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Mudhoney, and countless others absorb Pixies' lessons about dynamics, melody, and controlled chaos. Surfer Rosa establishes a template. You can be melodic and aggressive. You can be artistically challenging and emotionally direct. You can sound raw without sounding amateur. You can refuse to compromise and still create great art. The album's influence extends beyond music. The cover image, the topless flamenco dancer, the crucifix, the torn poster, becomes iconic in alternative culture. The confrontational aesthetic matches the confrontational music. By the mid-1990s, Surfer Rosa appears on countless greatest albums lists. Critics who initially gave it measured praise now call it essential. Rolling Stone, NME, Pitchfork, Spin all rank it among the best rock albums of the 1980s. In 1992, Elektra Records re-releases Surfer Rosa in the United States, capitalizing on the alternative rock boom Pixies helped create. Sales increase significantly. By 2005, the album is certified gold by the RIAA, 17 years after its initial release. The certification comes too late for the original lineup. The Pixies broke up in 1993 when Francis announced the split on BBC Radio without telling his bandmates first. They found out via fax. The tensions between Francis and Deal, simmering since Surfer Rosa sessions, had finally boiled over. But the reunion in 2004 proves the album's enduring power. When Pixies play Surfer Rosa tracks live, audiences, many born after the album's release, sing every word. Where Is My Mind becomes ubiquitous after appearing in the 1999 film Fight Club. The song's dreamy quality soundtracks the movie's explosive final scene, introducing Pixies to millions who'd never heard of them. The album achieves something rare. It becomes more influential after the band breaks up than while they were together. Surfer Rosa is a slow-burn masterpiece, a record that needed time to find its audience. Steve Albini's production becomes a blueprint for indie rock recording. His philosophy: capture the band as they actually sound, minimal overdubs, natural ambience, influences decades of engineers. The Surfer Rosa drum sound becomes something aspiring producers try to replicate. By the 2000s, Surfer Rosa isn't just an album, it's a landmark. A before and after moment in alternative rock history. A record that proved abrasive music could have melodies, that violent lyrics could coexist with pop hooks, that you didn't need a major label or MTV to make something timeless. The album sold poorly upon release. It changed everything anyway. Success breeds resentment. Influence breeds backlash. And in the case of Surfer Rosa, the most savage attack comes from the man who recorded it. 3 years after Surfer Rosa, the Pixies are recording their 4th album Trompe le Monde with producer Gil Norton. They're more successful now. Doolittle was a breakthrough. Tours are selling out. They're finally making real money. Steve Albini, meanwhile, is building his own legend. He's produced records for underground acts, maintained his uncompromising stance on artistry versus commerce, and cultivated a reputation as punk rock's moral conscience. That year, in the fan magazine Forced Exposure, Albini unleashes a verbal assault on the Pixies that stuns the music world. He calls Surfer Rosa a patchwork pinchloaf from a band who at their top dollar best are blandly entertaining college rock. He attacks their willingness to be guided by managers, record companies, and producers. Never have I seen 4 cows more anxious to be led around by their nose rings. The words are harsh, personal, designed to wound. They're also hypocritical. Albini produced the album he's now trashing, took the paycheck, put his name on the work. The underground scene is divided. Some applaud Albini for his uncompromising principles. Others see it as ungracious, mean-spirited, punching down at a band that was always respectful toward him. Years later, Albini will walk back these comments. In 2005, he apologizes publicly. To this day, I regret having done it. I don't think that I regarded the band as significantly as I should have. In 2023, he goes further in an interview for the Life of the Record podcast. I wrote some rather glib and unflattering things about that in a fanzine in the immediate aftermath of that record, and I'm ashamed of the way I treated them. He admits Surfer Rosa was a better record than I thought it was at the time. The reconciliation matters, but the damage was done. The public feud adds to the mythology around Surfer Rosa, the album that even its own producer briefly disowned. But there are other controversies simmering beneath the surface. Kim Deal's contributions continue to be downplayed. She's credited as co-writer on only one song despite her bass lines and vocals being integral to the album's sound. She's credited as Mrs. John Murphy on Gigantic rather than Kim Deal. The erasure is subtle but real. Deal will eventually leave the Pixies in 2013 after years of tension with Francis. When interviewed about the split, she's diplomatic but the hurt is evident. She formed the Breeders partly to have a creative outlet where her songwriting was valued. The album cover remains controversial decades later. Some feminist critics argue the topless flamenco dancer image objectifies women. Others defend it as artistic expression in line with the album's themes of Catholicism, sexuality, and surrealism. Francis's casual comments about liking nudity and body lines haven't aged particularly well. The studio banter that Albini included without permission also raises questions. Deal's story about the teacher into field hockey players is funny but potentially invasive. The band members have said they're fine with it, but as Albini admitted, would they really object to something that's on their record forever? There's also the question of credit and authenticity. Years later, some critics argue that Albini's production is so distinctive that he deserves more recognition for shaping the album's sound. Others counter that the Pixies arrived fully formed, arrangements locked, songs rehearsed. Albini simply captured what was already there. The truth, as always, is complicated. Both things can be true. The Pixies created the songs, the dynamics, the vision. Albini captured it in a way that enhanced rather than diluted their power. It's collaboration, not ownership. But perhaps the biggest controversy is one of perception versus reality. Surfer Rosa is often cited as an example of DIY punk ethos, 4 outsiders making uncompromising art on a shoestring budget. The narrative is appealing but incomplete. The Pixies weren't complete outsiders. They had a record deal with a respected independent label. They had management. They had a $10,000 budget, which, while modest by major label standards, was substantial for an indie release in 1987. They worked in a professional studio with experienced engineers. The album succeeded not by rejecting the music industry but by navigating it smartly. They signed with 4AD, which gave them creative freedom while providing distribution. They hired Albini, whose underground credibility lent them authenticity. They toured extensively, building audiences city by city. The myth of Surfer Rosa as pure punk rock outsider art obscures the reality. It was a strategic collaboration between talented musicians and industry professionals who understood how to work within and against commercial expectations. None of this diminishes the album's brilliance, but it complicates the simple narratives we prefer. 2005. 17 years after its release, Surfer Rosa is certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America. The certification comes long after the Pixies broke up, long after most albums from 1988 have been forgotten, long after anyone expected commercial validation. But by 2005, the album's influence is undeniable. An entire generation of alternative rock musicians cites it as formative. Critics universally praise it. Younger listeners discovering it through Fight Club or college radio or recommendations from older siblings recognize its power immediately. The legacy of Surfer Rosa extends far beyond sales numbers or chart positions. It proved that abrasive music could have mass appeal. Before Nirvana's Nevermind, before Pearl Jam's 10, before the entire alternative rock boom of the 1990s, Surfer Rosa demonstrated that audiences were hungry for something raw and real. The major labels weren't paying attention in 1988, but the college students who heard the album would become the tastemakers of the next decade. It established the quiet, loud, quiet dynamic as a fundamental tool of alternative rock. The Pixies didn't invent this technique. The Beatles used it, the Velvet Underground explored it, but Surfer Rosa refined it into a language that an entire generation would learn. Every time a modern rock song shifts from intimate verse to explosive chorus, it's speaking a dialect the Pixies helped create. It demonstrated Steve Albini's production philosophy on a major work. Before Surfer Rosa, Albini was known primarily for Big Black's confrontational noise rock. This album showed that his engineering approach, natural ambience, minimal overdubs, capturing bands as they actually sound, could work for melodic rock, not just hardcore punk. His career as one of alternative rock's most sought-after engineers flows directly from this album's success. It influenced musicians across genres and generations. The list of artists who cite Surfer Rosa as influential reads like a who's who of alternative and indie rock. Nirvana, Radiohead, Smashing Pumpkins, PJ Harvey, Weezer, Pavement, Modest Mouse, The Strokes, The White Stripes, Death Cab for Cutie, Block Party, and countless others. Some copied the sound directly. Others absorbed its lessons about dynamics and rawness. All recognized it as essential. The album ages remarkably well. Listening to Surfer Rosa today, it doesn't sound dated the way many 1980s albums do. There's no gated reverb, no synth-heavy production, no glossy sheen that screams 80s. It sounds like four people in a room making music. That timelessness is part of Albini's genius and the Pixies' vision. They weren't chasing trends, so the album doesn't get trapped by them. Where Is My Mind becomes a cultural phenomenon unto itself. Its placement in Fight Club introduces the song to millions who'd never heard of Pixies. The song takes on new life, appearing in countless films, TV shows, and commercials. It's covered by artists from Nada Surf to Placebo to Trampled by Turtles. Even people who've never heard Surfer Rosa know this song. By the 2000s and 2010s, the album appears on virtually every greatest albums list published. Rolling Stone ranks it number 315 on their 500 greatest albums of all time. Pitchfork gives it a perfect 10.0 score upon reissue. NME places it among the most influential albums in rock history. Academic music programs study the album's production techniques. Audio engineering students analyze Albini's drum sounds, his use of room ambience, his minimal overdub approach. The album becomes a textbook example of how to capture raw energy without sacrificing clarity. When the Pixies reunite in 2004, Francis announcing it casually at a concert to the shock of fans worldwide, Surfer Rosa tracks dominate their set lists. Songs like Bone Machine, Gigantic, and Where Is My Mind receive the loudest cheers. A new generation of fans, many born after the album's release, knows every word. The reunion tours are massively successful. Festivals pay huge fees to book them. Arenas sell out. The band that played small clubs in 1988 is now headlining major venues worldwide. Subsequent releases have mixed results. 2014's Indie Cindy, the first Pixies album with new material in 23 years, receives lukewarm reviews. But it doesn't matter. The legacy is secure. The Pixies' influence on modern rock is permanent, and Surfer Rosa remains the touchstone. In 2018, 4AD releases a deluxe reissue for the album's 30th anniversary, including the complete Q Division recording sessions, B-sides, and Peel Sessions recordings. Fans buy it eagerly, hungry for any additional material from those legendary 10 days in December 1987. The album's legacy is also personal. Steve Albini continues working as an engineer, producing thousands of albums over his career, always refusing royalties, always championing artists over corporations. He never makes another record quite like Surfer Rosa, but he doesn't need to. This one changed everything. Kim Deal forms The Breeders, creating critically acclaimed albums that showcase her songwriting talents. She proves what many suspected during the Pixies years. She's a brilliant artist in her own right, not just Francis's collaborator. Black Francis releases numerous solo albums under his birth name Charles Thompson, exploring different musical territories. He never recaptures the lightning-in-a-bottle magic of early Pixies, but few artists ever do. Joey Santiago scores films and works on various musical projects. David Lovering DJs and pursues magic as a side career, performing as the scientific phenomenalist. But when these four musicians play Surfer Rosa songs together, something magical happens. The chemistry that existed in that sewage-soaked Boston basement in 1986, that translated into those 10 days at Q Division in 1987, still exists. The songs still work. The dynamics still thrill. The violence and beauty still coexist. Surfer Rosa is the album that defined a band, influenced a generation, and changed the trajectory of alternative rock. It's 33 minutes of controlled chaos that somehow sounds both timeless and immediate, both professional and raw, both accessible and challenging. It sold poorly upon release and became one of the most influential rock albums ever made. That's the legacy. That's the echo that lasts forever. December 1987. Four musicians with $10,000 and 10 days to make an album. An engineer who doesn't believe in producers. A label willing to let artists make uncompromising art. A cultural moment when underground music was beginning to challenge the mainstream. All of it came together to create Surfer Rosa. The story of this album reminds us that influence doesn't follow a straight line. The record failed commercially but succeeded artistically. It was ignored upon release but became essential over time. It sold thousands initially but influenced millions eventually. We live in an era of instant gratification, where success is measured in first-week sales and streaming numbers. Surfer Rosa is a reminder that some art takes time to find its audience, that commercial failure doesn't equal artistic failure, that the most influential records aren't always the most popular ones. The album also reminds us that great art emerges from tension between band members, between artist and engineer, between commercial expectations and artistic vision. The Pixies and Albini didn't always see eye to eye. Kim Deal and Black Francis had creative conflicts. The label wasn't sure how to market them. None of this prevented them from making something brilliant. In fact, it might have helped. Surfer Rosa proved you could be melodic and aggressive, polished and raw, accessible and challenging. You didn't have to choose between commercial appeal and artistic integrity. You could create something that served both, even if the commercial success came later. The album's story is also about collaboration and credit. Who deserves recognition for great art? The songwriter who writes the melodies? The bass player whose parts define the sound? The engineer who captures it perfectly? The label that releases it? The answer is all of them. Creation is collaborative, messy, complicated. Simple narratives about lone genius rarely capture the full truth. And perhaps most importantly, Surfer Rosa reminds us that authenticity resonates across time. The album sounds urgent and real in 2025 because it sounded urgent and real in 1988. The Pixies weren't following trends or calculating their career moves. They were making the music they wanted to make, the way they wanted to make it. That's why it endures. That's why Kurt Cobain studied it obsessively. That's why Radiohead learned from it. That's why new generations keep discovering it and having their minds blown. Steve Albini spent years apologizing for criticizing the album he helped create. But maybe his initial ambivalence was part of the process. Great art doesn't require everyone involved to recognize its greatness immediately. Sometimes it takes distance, perspective, time. Surfer Rosa is 33 minutes of pure artistic vision captured perfectly in 10 days. It's 4 musicians at the peak of their powers, an engineer defining his approach, a label supporting uncompromising art. It's biblical imagery and surf rock, violence and beauty, Spanish and English, screaming and whispering. It's everything that makes rock music vital. Raw emotion, technical skill, melodic genius, and absolute refusal to compromise. The album won no Grammys. It appeared on no mainstream year-end lists. MTV never played it. Radio ignored it. It was, by conventional measures, a commercial disappointment. And it changed rock music forever. This has been the Sound Vault, where every note tells a story. And some notes, like the opening scream of Bone Machine or the dreamy guitar of Where Is My Mind, echo for decades.